Hello, my name is July Stewart, and in this video I'd like to talk about two things. Number one is what portion of the head of the racket goes toward the ball as you're hitting the ball, and the second thing I'd like to talk about is where's the pressure being applied on your racket handle as you're hitting the ball. Now, a lot of people like to get involved in this concept of as you take the racket back, the butt of the racket goes toward the ball and then the racket snaps and hits the ball. To be frankly honest with you, my mind can't even track that occurring. I really don't know. I can't feel it. I have no idea as I'm hitting the ball whether that is occurring or not. Now, doing video, I know it occurs, and I know because my racket does lag back and it's the head of the butt of the racket is going forward. I know that is occurring. But when I'm hitting tennis balls, I cannot concentrate on that. And the primary reason I believe is because my mind is focused on hitting the ball. And my mind is tracking where the racket head is going to hit the ball, not where my hand is all the time. Okay? So, the first thing I want to talk about is what portion of the racket goes toward the ball. On the forehand, on my forehand, it happens 2-3 different ways. When I'm hitting a forehand and I'm going to have a lot of drop and lag, as you can see the position of the racket, the face of the racket is parallel to the ground, right? And the racket is actually parallel to the ground too. What I'm doing here is that the front edge of the racket, what I'm pointing at now, the front edge, this portion of the racket is traveling toward the ball. That's in my mind's eye. And when I say my mind's eye, I say that's how I'm thinking, because I know what actually happens. As I go to hit the ball, the racket takes a turn up and I get my pronation. That's one way that I do it. Another way is that my strings are going toward the ball. So you'll see me come here, swing, and you notice that my racket is not parallel to the ground anymore. The face of the racket is, when I say face of the racket, I mean the string bed of the racket. The face of the racket isn't pointed to the ground. It's more perpendicular to the ground. Because what's happening is I'm traveling with the face of the racket toward the ball to hit the ball. Then there's the position where I'm actually taking the lower half of the racket, and that half of the racket is going to the ball first. So you may see that like on a lob, right? The lower half of the racket goes first. So generally when I'm playing defense, you'll see me taking the face of the racket toward the ball. So I'm just trying to get behind the ball and get the ball to meet it, like almost like hitting against the wall. So like the opponent is hitting against the wall, I'm just trying to get the racket flat there to get the ball back, to get the trajectory. When I'm being aggressive with my forehand, what I'm doing is I'm taking the racket, and you can see it drops. I'm actually driving the racket here, and then it will hit and make the pronation. So I'm, boom, there's the pronation. So as you can see, it's two different ways. Now I'll go to the one-handed backhand. On my one-handed backhand, I drive, again, more of the top edge of the racket toward the ball, and the racket has sort of a slant forward. On the chip, I drive the bottom half of the racket toward the ball. On the block, I drive the string bed or the face of the racket toward the ball. So you can see on different shots, I'm driving different portions of the racket. On the volley, forehand volley, I'm driving the bottom of the racket toward, and that's the head of the racket. When I say the bottom, I'm driving the bottom head of the racket toward the ball. On the forehand swing volley, I'm driving the top half of the head of the racket toward the ball. On the block volley, I'm driving the string bed toward the ball. Same thing on the backhand. On the backhand regular shot, I'm driving the bottom of the racket toward the ball. On the block, I'm driving the string bed toward the ball, right? Then on the swing volley, I'm driving the top of the racket toward the ball. Now, on my serve, it's the same thing. The serve, the first part of my racket that goes toward the ball, as you can see, it's the front part of the racket. So it makes a big difference. On the flat serve, same thing, but I just open it up a little bit earlier to get a flat shot, on it, right? Open up a little earlier. Now this goes to something that was very difficult for me to understand in the beginning of tennis, is how pressure is applied to the handle of this racket. You know, the certain grips you use. I don't like to get into grips because I hit with so many different grips depending on what I'm doing, and I'll probably have a separate video on that, on the changing of grips. But the one thing that happens is, as I swing from my forehand, the forward edge of the racket toward the ball, the pressure is being applied to the, let's just say, when the racket is perpendicular to the ground, it has been applied to the back half of the racket, or to the, if you look at the head of the racket, I'll call this the forward head that's going toward the ball, the back head, which is lagging. My pressure of my racket is being applied here on the handle. So as I go to swing it, I'm pushing the handle here. Now, it does change trajectory. I start off pushing it here, and it, boom, but that's where I feel like I'm putting the pressure. When I'm swinging the string bed of the racket toward the ball, I feel like the pressure is on, if the racket is facing perpendicular to the ground, I feel like the pressure is directly behind the racket, right? So perpendicular, directly behind the racket. I guess it'd be the number 1, 2, 3, on the number 3 position. So it'd be the top position is the number 1, then there's the number 2, number 3. So I think on the number, I feel like I'm pushing against the number 3 position, and I feel like all the pressure is coming from like my knuckle, my pointing finger knuckle. I feel like all the pressure is coming there. I very seldom feel any pressure toward the back of the hand. So it's always with my thumb, and I feel like all the pressure that I'm hitting the balls, all the pressure is coming from that area of my hand. When I'm swinging the lower half of the racket, so that's when I'm swinging the top half. When I'm swinging the lower half of the racket, it's kind of strange, because sometimes I feel like, so we go with the positions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 would be the lower half of the racket. I feel like my fingers toward the back of my hand, so not my index fingers, but the one to my back of fingers, sometimes I feel like those fingers actually pull the racket. I feel like they squeeze and pull the racket sometimes. But sometimes I feel like my index finger on the number 1 position, I feel like the knuckle here, I feel like it actually drives the racket. And then sometimes I feel like it's just my whole hand. So on the backhand volley, it's the same thing. A lot of times I feel like it's my lower fingers that are squeezing and pulling the volley. So in the backhand volley, I feel like it's my lower fingers that are pulling. But sometimes, and that's pulling on the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5 position. So I feel like those fingers are pulling on the number 5 position. I feel like that's what they're doing. They're the ones that are creating that pull. So I feel like that's what they're doing, or they're holding the racket. So, but when I'm trying to hit it with just the face of the racket, then what I feel like it's my thumb. I feel like it's my thumb on the number, let's just go around, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So let's call it number 7 position, which is the back of the racket. So I feel like my thumb is pushing on the back of the racket. So I feel like, boom, my thumb pushed the back of the racket. When I'm going for the swing volley, I feel like it's the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I feel like when I go for the swing volley, I actually feel like I'm pulling on the number 5 position. I don't feel like I'm pushing like on the number 1 position. I feel like I'm pulling. That's the way it feels to me. So I think it's important that as you go to hit tennis balls, that you start to pay attention to where you're applying pressure on the handle of the racket and what portion of the head of the racket is traveling toward the ball first. Once you start to get an idea and understanding on what is occurring then and how those shots work, you'll have a much better understanding on how to hit different spins on a tennis ball, and you'll also be able to see what your opponent is doing. For the slice, so you'll know that when somebody slices the ball, their racket is in this position, but they're going to be driving it. They have to be slicing. The only thing they can do is switch the position in their hand, but they can't. There's no way that they're going to come and change unless they do a complete grip change, or they're going to be able to get around to the other portion of the racket. So all those things will be keys to you to see what your opponent can do and what type of slice and spins that your opponent is putting on the ball. So I hope that was very helpful. I try not to make these videos too long, but sometimes you're going to have to listen to them several times. Now, I'm not trying to tell you I'm an expert on this stuff. I'm just telling you that when you're hitting tennis balls, start paying attention to these things so that you can be more consistent and have a better understanding of the type of shots that you're hitting and why these shots are working or not working. Thanks for listening.